In this episode of the Flying Free podcast, we dive into a conversation that's often left out of church teachings, the reality of wickedness in the world and how to navigate relationships with wicked people. Many of us grew up hearing that people are inherently good or simply struggling due to life's difficulties. But what happens when someone's actions reveal something darker? We explore the biblical distinctions between normal, wicked, and evil individuals, sharing insights from Adam Young's impactful podcast series, The Place We Find Ourselves. You'll learn how to recognize the differences through their responses to conflict, harm, and accountability. We'll also discuss the challenging process of waking up to this reality and how to safeguard yourself emotionally and spiritually. If you've ever wondered how to respond when someone's actions go beyond human imperfection into something truly harmful, this episode is for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more conversations related to emotional and spiritual abuse in the church. A member of my Kaleidoscope community for Christian women in painful and confusing marriages recently wrote this. How about the topic of coming to terms with the belief that there are evil people and that this is a thing? We've been brought up in the church to believe that all people are good. If people behave badly, then they're just dysfunctional because of their early childhood experiences and they need our help, our forgiveness. I've never heard a sermon on evil people or even how to respond to evil people. This leads Christian women to believe their husband just needs a praying wife, love, and forgiveness. Waking up to the fact that evil is actually a thing can take ages and be quite a shock. Okay, so I do want to talk about this, but I can't say that I was brought up in a church like the one that this person is describing, where they believe that all people are good. I was brought up being taught that all people are born sinful and that we lean towards sin from birth. When babies cry, they're just demanding their own way. When toddlers say no, they're expressing their sinful nature. And it's a parent's job to curb their sinful tendencies. I remember before I got married, I would observe the young married mothers at our church, and they would bring their babies and a blanket, and they would have what they called blanket time. And they would have a little stick that they would smack their child's hand with if their child even put a big toe over the edge of the blanket. Now, I'm sad to say that I tried to do that with my own babies when I started having them, but I was never successful. There was something about that practice that just felt off to me, and it didn't really work, at least for my babies. Maybe it was because I just couldn't be consistent, and I really had a hard time smacking them just because they put their hand off of the blanket. So after failing at it for a few times, I finally gave up, and then I just ended up using a playpen, which I also got criticized for, but at least in my playpen, my child was safe. He or she couldn't get out, and I was able to make dinner or go to a meeting or homeschool my kids back then when I was homeschooling. It was a safe place where my babies could play happily without worrying about getting smacked by their mother for, sticking their hand out. So I believe that this person who wrote this comment I believe that there are maybe pockets of people in certain religious circles who believe that everyone is perfect and beautiful, but I honestly don't know how they can sustain that belief with the reality of what relationships are like around them. It seems a little bit Pollyanna to me. What I think is probably more common in religious communities that believe that it is that people believe that people are sinful, but that we need to forgive them and love them anyway. Which is true, but then what happens is they apply this thinking to people who are more than just your garden variety of sinner, but who are actually either wicked or evil. I think the best teaching that I've ever heard on the biblical definition of what wicked or evil is comes from Adam Young's podcast called The Place We Find Ourselves. And I'm going to be referring to a few things from episode 93, which is part 1 of his series called Engaging with Someone Who Has Harmed You. And I highly recommend going over to his podcast and listening to this entire series from beginning to end to get the full scope of what he teaches. It's excellent. But he talks about how the Bible teaches that there are 3 kinds of people in the world: normal people, wicked people, and evil people. And it's important that we know the difference because we will want to show up differently in our interactions with them depending on who we're with at any given time. So how can you tell the difference between these three types of people? Because they all look the same on the outside. And the only way to tell the difference is by what they do and say in certain circumstances. So their outward behavior is what will inform you about what their heart is like on the inside. When everything is going well and there's no conflict and there's no fighting and there's no arguing and everything is going fine, they all kind of look the same. So the time to notice how they're different is when there's a problem. So when a child is fussing, or when a wife is exhausted and PMSing or whatever, or when the dog pees on the floor, or when they're stuck in traffic, or when the computer breaks. But the biggest giveaway, and I talk about this a lot on my podcast, the number one way to tell if someone is abusive is they don't take responsibility for their behavior. And this is what Adam Young talks about as well. He says the biggest giveaway that will reveal who they really are is if you tell them that they've hurt you in some way, that's when they will reveal what is underneath in their heart. So what does a normal person do when things go wrong? What do most of us do when things go wrong in our lives, which happens, almost every day. There's different things that go wrong. A normal person will sometimes feel anger, frustration, confusion, hurt, and they're going to express these feelings in the ways that most humans will express them. They might yell. They might say, I'm so frustrated. They might say, why don't you listen? Or this noise is driving me crazy. Or now I'm going to be late for work. Or I'm going to lose my bonus or whatever. They express their frustration with what's going wrong. And it's normal to react to hard situations with negative emotions. That's just, we're all, as part of our human experience, going to experience the gamut of the full scope of human emotions. Just because someone is mad doesn't mean that they're a wicked person. All normal people get mad. All normal people are going to say things that they regret later on. All normal people are going to make wrong choices sometimes. So if you do these things, you are just a normal human person. But what does a wicked person, with that biblical definition of what wickedness is, do when things go wrong? Well, they attack. They personally attack. And personally attacking another person is very different from pointing out something that they did that was hurtful towards you. Do you understand what I'm saying about the difference between those two? So an example of an attack might be, you always bitch and nag about every little thing I do. You're just a dripping faucet. The Bible sure knows what it's saying when it says that a man is better off on the roof. Just get off my case. That's an example of a personal attack. Now, an example of pointing out something hurtful that someone has done to you might look like this. When you don't look at me and listen when I'm talking to you, but instead you keep scrolling on your phone and making these deep sighs, I feel dismissed and unimportant, like I'm not even worth your time. And I'm really sad about that. Okay? That's an example of just giving someone feedback and letting them know your behavior is hurtful to me. Adam Young points out, I always want to call him Paul Young. I think there is a Paul Young author, but Adam Young points out that the wicked need to be shamed in order to be convicted. And we do need to make judgments about other people. So judging doesn't mean that we condemn them or punish them. Judging just means to evaluate someone, to know, how should I interact with this person? Who am I dealing with here? And I think the book of Proverbs is full of this kind of thing. I remember reading through the book of Proverbs when I was married to my ex, and when it dawned on me, I remember the rocking chair I was sitting in, the room I was sitting in, when it hit me like a bomb in between my two eyeballs, that every verse that was referring to fools, which I think is also what Adam Young is referring to when he talks about the wicked in the Bible, they're fools. Those verses were perfectly describing the man that I was with, my husband. And he was a man who, when I gave him feedback or let him know this behavior was really hurtful to me, he would attack me every single time. So I was not allowed to tell him how his behaviors were impacting me or how his behaviors were shredding me to pieces at times, or else he would tear me to pieces some more with his words of blame and shame. Adam Young points out that if you try to engage with a wicked person in the same way that you would engage with someone else, you're going to beat your head against the wall. He reminds us of the verse about not throwing our pearls before pigs. If you do, they will turn and trample your pearls and then turn and tear you to pieces. Because pigs don't understand. They're not saying that wicked people are pigs or that fools are pigs. What that verse is saying is that they don't know what a pearl is. They don't recognize it. A pearl, when you are making a bid for connection by sharing how someone else's behavior has hurt you, you're giving them a pearl. And all they're going to do is trample all over it. They're not going to actually take it for what you meant it to be, a pearl and a bid for connection, and they're going to attack you with it. So he says that wicked people refuse to say, "What have I done? What have I done to my child? What have I done to my friend? What have I done to my wife?" They refuse to experience the emotion of guilt because they've hardened their conscience. They don't feel shame or remorse. Wicked people, they're not going to pretend to be perfect. Overall, in general, they'll be able to say, I'm a sinner, I sin, I'm not perfect. They're not stupid. They're not going to, they're not going to pretend that they're a god or anything. But what they aren't going to be able to do is admit to specific things that they have done to hurt you. You'll never hear them saying that I specifically did this and this and this, and that was wrong of me to do that. I will do better next time. So if you say, ouch, that hurt me, your words are not going to land on them. They don't care about your pain. They don't have any self-awareness. They don't feel compassion. They deny the existence of any vengeful feelings or bad motives for themselves, but instead they'll actually project that onto you and say that you're the one that has the vengeful feelings and the bad emotions because they are convinced that they are righteous. And there's a difference between saying you're sorry and actually feeling sorrow in your heart for how you've hurt someone. And Adam Young gets this from Jeremiah 8, where it says, "No one repents of his wickedness, saying, 'What have I done?'" So when you confront a wicked person, and this is how you know that that's what you're dealing with, they're going to shift the blame on you and scapegoat you. And the word scapegoat comes from the Jewish ritual where the priest would put the sins of the people on a goat, a literal goat, and then send it out of the camp. And the goal is to separate the scapegoated person from the family, the church, or the business. So if you're being scapegoated, someone is putting their sin upon you and saying, "You're responsible for my sin, be gone with you." And that is basically projection. They're projecting their own wrongdoing on you. And then you end up getting labeled as the problem or the bad one because you brought up a problem. They'll often accuse you of the very sins that they themselves do and despise about themselves in their core being. And it's a very brilliant twisting of the truth. They're going to dismiss your wounds. Now, we as regular people, we are terrified of being cast out. But nevertheless, we understand on some instinctual level that if we confront a wicked person with the truth, they are going to banish us from the community. This is how I actually knew that I had grown up with a mother like this and married a man like this and was going to a church, a member of a church like this. Because they all did this. When I made a bid for connection, when I tried to say this really hurts, they attacked me, and eventually all three put me out of the camp. They all cast me out. I became their scapegoat. They didn't want to hear what they were doing that was hurting me. So because that would convict them, they didn't want that. And so they just cast me out and basically accused me of the very things that they were doing to me. Now I still, I would never have been able to put this into words like this. And even now it just seems so weird to me, but because I grew up with it, it's what I was living. It's like the water I swam in, but I was surrounded by wickedness and I am still healing from the deep lifelong wounds that they inflicted on my psyche. I still have moments or even sessions of deep sobbing and gut-wrenching grief when I think about these things that have happened. I really believe that long-term exposure to people like this means that a person will probably spend the rest of their life healing and processing the layers and layers of harm that were done to them. Wicked people are skilled at twisting words. The Psalms says that His speech is smooth as oil, but they are drawn swords. They want you to look like you're a silly for being hurt or for having your feelings hurt. Oh, feeling sorry for yourself now. You will feel very confused when you're having conversations with people like this because you won't know what's up from down and what's black and white and what's right and wrong, what's light and dark. It's all mixed up. Their power over you often, this is another thing, it might look like they are the powerless one or that they're the weak one. Remember, wicked people are all about deception. So they'll often what you see is what is called DARVO in survival circles, which stands for deny and reverse victim and offender. So they'll deny what they did, and then they'll put you in the place of the offender, and they'll take the place of the victim. And actually, my ex was actually very successfully able to do this in the church that ultimately excommunicated me. He ended up looking like he was my victim. And because of the way he came across and the persona that he presented to everyone else. And so they bought it. And that didn't serve anybody very well, but that is how the wicked present themselves. It's what some people call it weaponizing fragility. So wicked people despise the cost of growth. They are repelled by honestly facing life, but they are also solid citizens that can be very active at church, doing church volunteer work or volunteer work in their community, going to the school and getting involved with the teachers. Not always, but they can show up like that. Now, I'm not going to go into this, but Adam Young does this a lot in his series, and I recommend going over there and listening to it. But he says, briefly, I'll just share that. He says the difference between wicked and evil people is that evil people are actually bent on your humiliation and destruction. So, and then in part 3 of his series, he talks about how do we love a wicked person? And I will just share a really, really brief overview. Again, go to that series and listen to everything that he says there. But he makes the point that love is always going to disrupt the status quo or this current status of the relationship. And we don't want to do that. That's so uncomfortable. But if you truly love someone, there has to be a change, because not that the other person is going to change, but the relationship is going to change, because now you're called, instead of being silent or fighting, you could have either spent most of your time in the past either fighting the situation, fighting against that reality of who this person is, or trying to get them to change, or you could be sitting back and trying to hide, right? And trying to just not rock the boat. Let's just keep the waves at a minimum so that I can survive this. But neither of those things is actually going to change the relationship. What will change is when you begin to lovingly call them out. And actually what will happen is they'll actually get worse. When I talk about this, we talk about it more in terms of boundaries. The more you set boundaries, the more that the other person is going to react. That's how you know that you are in a relationship with an abuser or with a wicked person, as this series talks about. And then once you know that and you lean into that reality, now you can make decisions from a place of reality instead of magical thinking or hoping that they're going to change someday or waiting for some kind of miracle in their lives that God's going to, bibbity boppity boo like a fairy godmother and change them. That's not how God's not like that. That's like really a small view of God. It's a very small God that we worship if we view God in that way. So change, how God makes change is in the lives of individuals who are coming to him for that creation, the creation of that change. And that's you. You're the one that's asking for that change. So what you will change is that you will see if they're truly wicked by this definition. They will not answer your call. They will not change, but they will attack you. And then you're going to need to decide whether or not you're going to spend time with them. And the Bible talks a lot about spending time with people who are wicked in Proverbs. It ruins our lives. The Bible says in Proverbs 13:20, he who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Jan Silvius, in her book, Foolproofing Your Life, points out that companion means he who grazes in the same pasture with. So he who grazes, who lives with a fool, will suffer harm. And the word for harm there in the Bible actually means destroyed, will be destroyed. If you are living with a fool, you will be destroyed. And you probably already know that if you've been living with one for very long. So if we go back to the original comment that this woman made in our kaleidoscope, it wasn't really a question as much as it was a request to just talk about it. I would sum everything up by saying that at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what your church leaders or your church friends or your neighborhood or your family of origin or your adult children or anyone else in your life believes about the differences between a biblically wicked person and an average human being. What matters is what you believe and what you're going to do with that belief. And how will that impact your life? So where do you go from here? Well, I have a course in the Flying Free Kaleidoscope called Dysfunctional Relationships, how to deal with dysfunctional relationships. And the lessons in that course, you will learn the difference between a healthy and unhealthy relationship, how to spot a counterfeit relationship, how to break patterns of dysfunctional relationships, why we feel addicted to and stuck in those kinds of relationships, the 14 emotional abuse tactics, and as well as the strategies for dealing with those emotional abuse tactics. And then we talk about traumatic mind mapping, as well as strategies for co-parenting with an emotional abuser and communicating with others about an emotionally abusive relationship. This course also has several bonus workshops on this topic that are going to rock your world. You can learn more about how to join the Kaleidoscope and take this course by going to joinflyingfree.com.